Welcome to Emmanuel Fellowship Pastors Talk, where we talk to one of our pastors about a recent sermon. I'm Sam Tunnell, lead pastor at Emmanuel Fellowship Church, and I am joined today by my wife, Kim Tunnell.
Woo, woo.
Thanks for being here, babe. This last Sunday, we were continuing our series in Matthew. I got to preach, and we were in Matthew 9. And so it was actually a longer text. We read a couple of Jesus's miracle narratives, the narrative where he heals the two blind men who call out to him, the narrative where he casts out the demon who was keeping the man mute. But it comes together at the end of chapter 9 in kind of a famous text where Jesus, it kind of summarizes Jesus's healing and teaching ministry. And then it's that bit where it says, he looked out at the crowds and they were distressed, they were distraught. He had compassion on them because they were sheep without a shepherd. And that's the famous bit where Jesus, he says, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. So pray to the Lord of the harvest. So I think a really challenging text heading in or coming out of this week. What were your thoughts on it, Kim?
Well, obviously, I am co-laboring with you right now in the throes of parenting for children, and two of them being foster kiddos. And so when you gave your, when you gave your opening illustration, talking through what it looks like to help your child co-regulate as you being the primary regulator, so that your child, when they're in a tizzy or a frenzy or feeling chaos internally or showing chaotic behavior externally, how you are the one that helps ground them, calm them, and invite them back into really a reality, right? Because when they're throwing their fit and when they are dysregulated, they are in their primal brain and they're not actually thinking cognitively. So when you settle them and they help, you help them regulate to your emotions, then you're able to actually have a reasonable discussion with the child. And I loved that. I loved that you used that illustration at the beginning to be able to connect that with the way that Jesus was addressing the crowd, because it says that they were distressed. They were in their own form of dysregulation, right? They were living in sin, which sin brings chaos. When you're living out of the flesh, it takes you into a space of just feeling all kinds of things, whether that's guilt or shame or anxiety or sorrow, whatever it is. And it pulls you out of just that space of how you were meant to live in relationship with God. And so I love the idea that Jesus comes alongside them and he has compassion toward them. That is his response, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that part up. That was my opening illustration in the sermon. And obviously you and I are in the trenches on this together. But what was so striking to me is the fact that I'm bad at that. When our kids are dysregulated and they're throwing a fit, my gut reaction is to not walk in the room with compassion.
Right.
It's to match them, anger for anger and dysregulation for dysregulation, and to plant my foot and go, you won't behave that way, and you don't do this and you don't do that. And it was this example of the Spirit actually meeting me in parenting and going, hey, how about you approach this kid with compassion? And it struck me heading into the text of that is exactly what Jesus does for us. He doesn't respond to our brokenness, the way the curse has affected us, or our sinfulness, the way we furthered the curse. He doesn't respond with anger, with judgment, with slamming his foot down. He responds with compassion. He steps into the muck with us. He co-regulates us in that he connects to us instead of putting such a huge emphasis on all the ways I failed. Christ instead sees his image stamped in me and draws me unto himself. And man, it was such a concrete reminder of how good God has been to me, and has just wrecked me this week as I think about how I love and care, not just for my kids, but for everyone in my life. All the ways I engage brokenness and lostness around me.
Yeah. And I love what you said about, co-regulating or helping somebody to regulate as we help our children do that. And as God helps us as his children regulate to him, the emphasis is always connection. So when your child is dysregulated and they're all over the place, what you're inviting them back to is connection in that relationship. And God invites us to the same thing. We were built for a relationship with God. Sin separates us or causes us to step out of and away from that connection. And God lovingly, with compassion, invites us back into that connection. And I love that he helps us regulate through his word, right? By being in the word of God, by reading his words to us. It helps us calm ourselves. It helps pull us back into the heart of God. Same with prayer, same with other spiritual disciplines as this means of grace to connect us back with his heart. So I love this idea of seeing God as this loving parent that is helping us as his children co-regulate back to his heart, because he is the stabilizing force, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't respond to our sin with this like fit of rage. Oftentimes, like I do with my own children, right? Like I want to respond in a fleshly way. But instead, when you remain calm, when you invite them back into connection, there is peace and there is a stability and there is a safety. And that is so God's heart toward us, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Man, that's
I
good.
loved that.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. There was something else that you had mentioned later on in your sermon, and it was about the quote by Tony Campolo. Can you remind me of that quote? Because it's haunting, honestly.
Yeah. Yes. So we got in the end into kind of the practical application piece, right? Like what are the practical ways we as Christians now can join with Jesus in his mission? Because it's the whole bit where it lands, right? The harvest is plentiful, the workers are few. And so I walked through 5 different ways, like what it looks like for the Christian to be involved in the mission. So we talked about the idea of gratitude, that we start by remembering the gospel, the whole co-regulation piece. I remember how Christ has responded to me with compassion, and so that gratitude fuels me to join in the work. And then we talked about the idea of compassion, that because we have received the love of Christ, we give the love of Christ, that we're able to look at the sinful, broken world the way Christ looked at us. I talked about service and proclamation, how those two things go together, and that's where the Tony Campolo quote comes in. And we ended talking about prayer. And so that quote, right, like it's a pretty famous quote from Tony Campolo. If you guys don't know him, he's an old school Baptist evangelist guy, and it's
Is he like 150 years old right now?
he's very old. I don't think he's doing ministry anymore. He had some pretty serious health issues over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
But it's this whole idea that, you'll sometimes hear people say, it's this famous old quote, preach the gospel and if necessary use words, essentially saying that you need to make sure you are living a Christ-like life in how you interact with people. And that's 100% true, in that you should be living a Christ-like life. You should be serving people, meeting their needs. But the flip side to that is you can't proclaim the gospel without words, because faith comes by hearing. The gospel must be proclaimed in deed, yes, but also in word. And the reason is because we are complete people. We're a unity, right? Like, people do have real physical needs. People also have real spiritual needs. And so Tony's quote, he essentially says, it is a terrible thing if someone is starving. It's a terrible thing to tell them about the bread of life without giving them real bread. And so if you have someone who has a real immediate physical need and you only seek to meet their spiritual need, you're doing them a disservice, because they're a whole person and their physical need is real and it's important. But he then goes on to say, but it is an absolute tragedy to send someone to hell with a full stomach. If you have someone who has a real physical need and all you do is meet their physical need, but you don't do anything to address their spiritual need, you've done them an immense disservice. Because when the physical need is met, that person might think, oh, okay, I'm good, right? But man, we are a whole person. We are a body and a spirit, and spiritual need is very real. And so that idea of, like, you see that in Matthew 9, Jesus traveled around Galilee. He met their needs. He did miracles. He cast out demons. He met the people in their immediate needs, but he also proclaimed the good news of the kingdom. He also told them, here's what God is doing with your forever. And so if we're going to follow in Jesus' footsteps, we got to do both. We got to have both ideas. We got to meet whole people.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm sorry that I'm making this all about parenting and children, but that is the space of life that I'm in right now. And so just thinking through, sorry, I think my child is coming into, yes, okay. Hi. Um, Speaking of children though, right? Yes. Oh no, here. I will help you. Give me just a second, okay? I'm talking to Daddy.
Hi, Dad.
Okay. Speaking of children, so I'm in a season of life where I am meeting very practical needs. There are four
Yeah.
kids and they are very needy. I need to bathe you. I need to clothe you. I need to feed you. I need to, do whatever for you. A lot of these need meeting things. And it is easy for me. It was so good to hear that quote because it's so easy for me where I will have days that go by and I'll think, have I talked to my children about Jesus today? Did I
Yeah.
actually pray with them in the midst of meeting all the needs? Because yes, it's good that I'm taking care of them and clothing them and feeding them. But if that's all I'm doing, then I too am guilty of sending my children, to hell, essentially. Like, not really, but that's
Yeah.
strong language. But making the point, like, I need to have space, daily space, where not only am I nurturing them in these needs, but also taking care of them spiritually by sharing the gospel with them, by actually pointing them to Jesus in words.
Amen. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to land on one other thing. I want to be respectful of your time. One other thing I want to make sure we point out before we end this. I ended this idea of saying part of being on mission is being a person of prayer, and I think it's really interesting to note that in the text, Jesus says, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few, and he ends by saying, therefore, pray to the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into the field. I think it's so interesting that Jesus's solution to the need is prayer. And the reason I bring that up is I feel like a lot of us as American Christians can fall into this kind of guilt complex where we feel like if I'm not a super outgoing social person with sales skills, then I can't be evangelistic, right? And I think it's important to remember that at least from Jesus's perspective, being a person of mission means being a person of prayer. Like
Yes.
prayer is the primary work of mission, And I just I don't know. I think there's something about that that's so encouraging because we all can be people of prayer. Even if you're someone like me who's more introverted, who doesn't like social interactions, who doesn't, like to talk to strangers or whatever, we can be people of prayer. We can think about the lostness in our circumstance, in our area of influence, and we can be prayer for people.
Yeah, absolutely. The idea of thinking that you can go out and be missional, right? You can go out and be evangelistic and share your faith, void of any type of prayer before that or after that or during that time is very wild, right? Because then you really are just doing it out of your own strength. And it's you're missing out on that supernatural power of the spirit where when you're in prayer over being missional, your eyes become open and attuned to seeing people as God sees them, to having a heart that's ready to engage in those conversations because you've already prepared your heart in prayer. You've already spent time with the Lord asking for these things. So you're very mindful and present and aware when the opportunity arises. You go, there it is. I was expecting this because I asked for this. And God delights in answering this prayer. And now he's with me as we get to experience this together. So yes, I think prayer is not just something as an afterthought to missionality. It is what undergirds the mission, right? It's the backbone. It holds it all together. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love the idea that if you're the kind of person who does struggle with some fear and maybe even some cowardice or hesitation around sharing your faith, like prayer is the perfect next step, the perfect first step, because first and foremost, God is the one who's seeking and saving the lost. And so you should seek the Lord of the harvest. But second, man, if you are continually praying for someone who needs Jesus, that is going to push you. It's going to push you on your fear. It's going to challenge you on your hesitation and make you more ready and potentially more open to be God's tool of presenting his gospel. Kim, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to chat with me. This has been a joy. You're great. I like you.
You're great. Do you have plans for like the rest of your life?
I do.
Really like
they're
you.
pretty set.
Okay, well, they're with me. So It is a privilege being your wife, but it was also such a joy and a privilege getting to talk through your sermon with you. So thank you for letting me do this with you. That was awesome.
Yeah, thanks for
I
that.
love
Guys, thanks for hanging out with us. We'll see you next Sunday.